Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Wonderbound panel for the Unfinished Corner, Golems, Angels, and Jewish Mysticism with writer Dani Colman and artist Rache Petrovicz. Welcome, everyone. If anyone after this panel would like to learn more about this book or anything about Wonderbound, please go to readwonderbound.com or come visit our virtual booth. We have lots of goodies there, particularly for this book. There's a trailer, there are tons of videos with Dani talking even more about the book. There's downloadable freebies, there's all kinds of fun stuff. So please visit the booth. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We will try and answer as many as possible at the end of this discussion. But I want to introduce everybody to writer Dani Colman and author Rache Petrovicz, who doesn't have a webcam, but she's here and we love her anyway.
Hello.
So we're talking about The Unfinished Corner, which is one of our Wonderbound's first launch books. It's going to be coming out on October 19th of this year. It is a middle grade fantasy. And the premise behind this book, so Jewish mythology says that when God created the universe, God left one corner of it unfinished. And opinion is split as to why that was. Some people believe that it's a home for demons. Some people believe that it's left for humankind to finish. But none of these things matter to Miriam Feigenbaum, who is 12 years old and about to have her bat mitzvah. And she's very concerned. She's not sure if she wants to go through with it. But when she's about to go on a field trip with her two best friends and her worst frenemy, Judith, their chaperone suddenly reveals that he is an angel in disguise, and he whisks them away to a fantastical land full of amazing creatures and stories and characters from Jewish lore, and gives them the mission of having to find the unfinished corner and finish it. No pressure for these 12-year-olds. This is a perfect book for fantasy fans of books like Amulet or Narnia, or books about friendship like Real Friends. It's a beautiful celebration of so many things, and I cannot wait for these creators to tell you about it. So Dani, let's start with you. You pitched us this book originally way back in 2017. Tell us what was behind this book.
So when I had the opportunity to pitch to the Vault, I really wanted to present something that was going to stick out, that no one would really have heard before. I'm Jewish, in case you can't tell. I grew up in that tradition, and I also grew up a genre reader and have so many fond memories during my childhood of reading fantasy books that were steeped in various cultures and history and mythology. And so I really wanted to do something like that, but for Jewish mythology, which is incredibly rich and incredibly diverse and spans, thousands of years of storytelling and so many sort of deep and interesting foundational texts. But it hasn't really been mined for fantasy storytelling in a big way. And that to me felt like something was missing for young Jewish readers, for young non-Jewish readers who might want to know more about Jewish mythology, or just, read something that comes from a place of reality but still makes for really fun fantasy and adventure. So I really kind of came to the pitch with the notion of, let's fill that gap and let's pull from this incredibly rich mythology and culture to create an adventure that's a little bit unlike anything you've ever really seen before.
It's one of the things I love about the book, and I've heard you talk about folklore before and how you're a big reader of all things folklore and coming from lots of different parts of the world. And one of the things I love about folklore is that it's both very like vertical and horizontal. It can make you learn very much about one culture, but it also makes you realize how everyone is very connected, because there's lots of patterns in these stories that come up again and again. For this world and the culture that you pulled from, what were the things that you felt like were really important, that were specific to the Jewish mythology, that you felt really brought this story to life for you?
So one of the things that's really interesting about Jewish folklore to me is that it is incredibly diverse, because Jews are kind of global. They've been spread out for a very long time. Historical events have kind of made that necessary. And so Jewish storytelling incorporates elements from every place where Jewish communities exist. So you have folk tales that are from the Middle East or from Eastern Europe or from parts of Africa, and incorporate those kind of themes and figures and locales. But what makes a folktale to me uniquely Jewish, no matter which kind of assimilated culture it's pulling from, is that it's very much about cleverness, about community, about lateral thinking. There's a real emphasis on problem solving and on working together. There are very, very few Jewish folktales that I was able to find where the solution to a problem is punching your way through it. And that's something that, as kind of, I've always been a small, nerdy kid. I was never going to win any fight. So that's something that always really appealed to me. And it's something that's very true to Judaism as a religion as well, that it has this real focus on learning, passing on information, existing within a community. So I really wanted to build off these stories that are about thinking your way out of a problem, sometimes through, things like wordplay or lateral interpretation of the rules. If you can make it work, if you can come up with a valid interpretation of the rules that you've been given, then you can use that. And I love that.
I think this is the only middle grade book I've ever seen that has an actual joke that lands very well about semantics. So yeah, but that leads into one of the things I want both of you to talk about is, you talk about the diversity of, the Jewish people, how widespread, the community is, and, about how problem solving and how you approach problems and how you think through things is very important, how community and solving problems together is a huge part of the faith. And that is something that's so present in this cast of characters. And I know that it was really important to you. And then Rachel, when you were designing these characters and bringing them to life, and it was important from your side as well, that we had a cast that was really diverse, even within the Jewish faith. And that not only did each one of these kids have a very different relationship with their faith, in some ways, they came at it from different backgrounds, different levels of connection, but also the way that they all think just as 12-year-old kids and how they approach problem solving is very different. So I wanted you both to talk a little bit about what it was like creating these 4 incredible kids who I love so much.
Yeah, I'll start with that if you don't mind. I'll jump in for a second here.
Yeah.
When it came to approaching the characters, obviously my first exposure to them was reading through the script in its basically fully finished form. And when I was first introduced to them, Miri, our main character, is introduced first, and she has her opening scene where you get to know her and her affinity for art and maybe the way that she sees the world. And then you are slowly introduced to her 3 friends, Abby, David, and Judith. And in reading the script, it was immediately so clear what each character's motivation was, what each character's personality was. Their introductory scene says so much about them. And from that point, immediately pictures start coming up in my head. When I'm reading through something, I am always translating from written word to images as I go. And I have to start sketching pretty much right away in order to capture those, and making sure that we made each character unique, but at least 3 of them are friends to start out with, so they probably have some overlap in the way that they dress or the types of accessories that they wear, and then you kind of dig in from there. And it was so wonderful being able to collaborate with not only Dani but Tay and chat through some of these ideas and kind of each person bring their own opinion as to what this character would look like and how they would express themselves. And going back to the idea of collaboration in problem solving, I think that even just the act of making the comic and designing the characters was an exercise in that, and as one of the most valuable parts about working on this project for me.
Definitely. Dani, what about you? Bringing these 4 kiddos to life, what was that like?
So something that I consider so foundational about ensemble storytelling is that for every character in your main group, there has to be a point in the story where the story couldn't continue if that character were not there. So it doesn't matter who your protagonist is, because if you have a group of characters, there's always going to be a reader who identifies most with someone who isn't the protagonist. I mean, think of all the kids, reading Harry Potter who are like, no, I'm Hermione.
This girl right here.
So that was something that absolutely informed the writing of these characters, that they had to be distinct, they had to have skill sets that played well together, and each one of them had to have a point where they were, for that point, the hero who got the entire group from A to B. And what was so wonderful about the collaborative process is that, you know, in the first round of character designs, it took a couple of passes to get everything absolutely right. But what was clearly so dialed in just from moment one was the whole team, myself, Tay, Rachel, got who these characters were on a fundamental level. There was never a case of, you know, here's a drawing of someone who's not really in this book. It was always, okay, we understand, we know who this character is, we know how they move the story forward. Now let's figure out the details, like what color sweater they wear or how they wear their hair.
Yeah, and I know, Rachel, one of the cool things that you got to do with this was that, you know, the kids all start in their street clothes and what they wore to school that day, but then over the course of the book, they all change their costumes into some, you know, in when they're meeting with, I believe, the Morning Star, right? Is that the scene where they change? I think it is. Dani, you would know. Istahara?
It's her sister, Nama.
Her sister, Nama, that's right.
Yep.
They all change their clothes into clothes that they find in the magical world. You know, Rachel, you to this book without having a background in Jewish folklore or growing up Jewish, and suddenly got thrown into having to design costumes based off of Jewish folklore and Jewish history and Jewish fashion and history, like all these different things, not to mention all the different creatures you had to design and the architecture that you brought to the space. And some of it was very real. We go to Prague, which is like an actual place. You had to draw actual synagogues that really exist, to, you know, fantastical cities that are not depicted anywhere, that you have zero reference for other than feeling. What was that part like for you?
Yeah, as Dani kind of touched on, so much of like Jewish culture is in the diaspora. It's spread out across the entire world. So like, while when I was first reading through the script and like, I'm like, why did they come to me for this? I have no background in any of this. I feel like I'm starting from nothing. But in the end, it ended up being, I think, a strength that I was able to play to. And digging into the reference images that exist of real places all around the world, like places in Western Asia and places in Africa and places in, like you say, Prague, and being able to pick and choose little bits that worked for the scene while combining it with kind of more fantastical elements. And for those fantastical elements, I could reach into my own personal vault, so to speak, of creative reference and pick things that I really like, so that I was able to inject not only my research into the work, but my personal preference as well. And like through, it was again another collaborative experience of checking in with Dani and being like, okay, what do you think makes sense here? And then me being able to be like, okay, that's what Dani said. I'm pretty sure that I can take this minor creative like change here and then bring it all together. And yeah, I think like being able to look back on my own experience as a kid, reading comics has always been my life. And I know that reading comics was what made me want to make comics and pursue art in general. And so by being able to craft these deep worlds that are simultaneously inspired by mythology, but simultaneously bringing my own preferences to the table, I hope that people can identify with what I've drummed up, and then that it will inspire them to want to create their own fantasy worlds based on either their pure imagination or aspects of their own life or faith.
Absolutely. I think it's one of the powers of genre. You know, I think that books that are really grounded, you know, there's a benefit for that for kids at this age, where they can either like see it and say, ah, that's my experience, or someone has that experience, man, and it like expands their worldview. But I feel like genre is great because it allows the space for two different kids from two different backgrounds, two different ways of thinking, to experience the same story and both feel like it's theirs in a way. And I feel like pairing you guys together on this book actually, you know, it accomplished that mission of being able to be a book that is for every single kid, and every single kid can go on an adventure. And Dani, I know you've talked a lot before about how you wanted this book to be a place for joyous storytelling, and that was really, really important to you, and it absolutely is. The book also, you don't shy away from some of the tougher aspects of what these kids are going through, and you don't, you allow the fact that every 13-year-old, but very specifically these 12 to 13-year-olds, they have some really difficult stuff that they're going through that they have to deal with and that they can't emotionally avoid. So why would we as storytellers emotionally avoid it just because they're kids? Can you talk a little bit about that balance for you of kind of tracking, making sure that it was full of joy, but also not shying away from the darker elements?
Yeah, and I think one of the exciting things about being in that kind of preteen stage in your life is that you're getting used to the idea that the world is big and it doesn't just revolve around you. But you also there's still a lot you don't know that you're learning and you're figuring out and discovering kind of in real time. And that interplay between the two things, between kind of having this very sort of rich internal life that kids tend to, but also starting to have both hopes and anxieties about the future, about the wider world. That's something it's something honestly that was really exciting to explore in this book. Because I remember being about the age when I had my own bat mitzvah and enjoying learning about the culture and enjoying having a day that was all about me, but also having a lot of anxiety, honestly, knowing that along with this came the notion of entering into adulthood, of taking on responsibility, not just for my own actions, but for this entire history and culture that I was now a part of. And I think it's naive to think that younger readers aren't thinking about these kinds of things on their own, because they are. And so it became really important to me to give these kids in the book space to confront what's difficult in their lives, whether that's unsureness about who they are and their place kind of in the wider world, or whether it's this anger that that Avi, for example, feels about some of the terrible history that the Jews have gone through, or feelings of not belonging, or feelings of having a difficult family history. I wanted to give them space to confront that because it meant that they could confront it together. Something that is so important about this group of characters is that over the course of the adventure, they come together. Those of them that are already friends reevaluate their friendships. Those of them who have some conflict at the beginning resolve that conflict and learn to appreciate each other. And that kind of deepening of relationships has the most meaning when you're dealing with some of this serious stuff as you go through it.
Absolutely. And I think, I've always found that one of the best ways to get a reader to care about a character is to show another character caring about that character. And you do that, but you guys do that to another level because you have them go through some really real stuff together. Even though it is set in this fantasy world, the stakes feel so real throughout the entire thing. And I think part of that is that like mix of complete fantasy, but then there's also these moments where it feels very real, whether it's going to Prague all of a sudden, or the fact that we start in New York, or even just the fact that a lot, because this world is based off of Jewish folklore and but also religion and practices that still happen now. A lot of these kids are still doing traditions and are living in a lot of the elements that then you sort of stretch and fantasize and kind of take to the other end of the spectrum of folklore. And I think that element of this book is so cool because it makes it all feel so real and makes the stakes feel high, even though it is still this beautifully joyous book. Speaking of joy and fun, for both of you, since we deal with all of these crazy characters and we go all over the place in all these different settings, what was your favorite adventure piece? What was your favorite like creature or character or thing you got to design? What was your favorite sequence? There's so many different ones.
Oh my gosh, Dani, go first because I have to think about this for a sec because like you said, there are so many good ones.
This is tough. But for me, it has to be the sequence in Prague. So the story of the Golem of Old Prague is one of relatively few Jewish folk tales that's fairly universally known. And it's been dealt with in media before, in books. I want to say the Golem showed up in an episode of Supernatural a few years ago.
It must have.
Everything.
There's like
shows up in
17 seasons of that show.
but it's one of those. It was a story that I felt we really had to take on, because to a lot of non-Jewish readers, it could be kind of an entry point of, oh, here's a story that I recognize. But I also really wanted to do something new and unique and meaningful with it. And figuring out just on an intellectual narrative level what that could be was very, very challenging. But ultimately, I think we came up with something completely unique that I've never seen done before for the Golem.
Oh, yeah.
And the way that Rachel designed this version of the Golem that ended up in the story is just, every time I see the page, I feel a lump in my throat.
Yeah,
So
no spoilers.
I don't want to
but it
give
was
too much
definitely
away,
fun.
but that sequence to me just kind of encapsulates what the book is.
All right, I've taken my time to make this difficult decision, and I think that my favorite scene, just because it's so unusual and so unlike anything that even happens in the rest of the book, is the scene where we have a how should I describe, a makeover contest, I guess is the best way to put it.
With the devil.
With the devil, yes. We've got like doppelgangers, we've got magical makeup, and it's an opportunity for one of, I think, our team's favorite characters to get a little bit more space to express herself, and we get to know her a little bit better despite being kind of closed off for a lot of the book. And yeah, I would say that one was, it has a place in my heart, and especially it ends on a really kind of exciting note that then triggers more action-packed events. So yeah, that's gonna be my pick.
That one is special, and you get to do some, like, I think there's two-page spreads in a row with that one that are really
Yes.
fun, and the conversations that they have and the way that you laid that out was, I think, really special. And it's like a strangely intimate scene. You hear makeover contest and you think like Project Runway or something, but it's actually one of the more like personal and quiet moments of the book where the characters are like very with each other and having very deep conversations, and it's not what you would expect. And I totally agree with you that it's one of the highlights of the book. I'm gonna say the lion, because guys, the lion is the greatest. There's a giant flying lion in this book. It's the best thing ever. They ride around on it. It's just awesome. Yeah. Speaking of Judith, our the character that holds in our hearts, who has just the most attitude of anyone ever. And she is the pilot of our beautiful flying lion. I love her so much.
Something that I love about that sequence, and that I think comes across really nicely in a lot of areas in the book, is the idea that you don't necessarily have to like someone to respect them.
Yes.
There are a couple of characters in this book who take a while to really learn to like each other, but they learn to respect each other much more quickly because they have to work together to solve problems. And something that I love so much about the Makeover Challenge is that it shows one of the many stages of this relationship that goes from not really liking each other to grudgingly respecting each other to sincerely respecting each other to a very genuine friendship by the end.
I agree completely. I think by the end, like, that's the one thing that carries the book from start to finish, is the characters' friendship and how it changes between the characters and how they all get to know each other better. And it feels so sincere by the end. The last page was an emotional drawing moment for me. That's for sure.
Tears. And I think that's, again, like, that's one of the special things about genre. You can have the stakes be so high. I know Judith reminded me a lot of like relationships I had with girls on like sports teams, because they're people that you might not ever be friends with in your normal course of your school life, but you go through these experiences that are just like so emotional, and you know each other in these moments of like victory and grief and all of these really, really, really intense emotional moments where you're full of adrenaline. And in genre, you get to do the same thing, because you get to send your kids off on this adventure where it's life and death and the stake of the universe and all this stuff. So the things that they're going through, they share those crazy experiences together, you know, and they learn to respect each other no matter whether they like each other or not, because they've had each other's backs through something that is just bigger than anyone else will ever know. And when they get back at the end, there's that sense of like, hey, remember when we went on that crazy adventure with the flying lion and the golem and did a makeover challenge? And it's pretty great. Well, we love this book so much. And I was so honored that I got to talk about it at the editor's pick panel today. I wish you both had been able to be there with me and talk about it yourselves instead of my stupid face being up there and talking about it, because you guys have just been such an incredible team. And I'm so excited for kids to find this book and to create community over this book. You know, I know all three of us were big genre readers, fantasy readers when we were kids. We were all nerdy, and that was, I know how part of how I found friends at this age was falling in love with something like this, a book like this, and then finding other kids that were obsessed with it. And everybody feels like it's theirs in that way, so that you form bonds over it. And I know you guys had similar experiences when you were 12-year-old readers of fantasy and these kinds of stories. So I am so excited for kids to create that community through this and hopefully create bridges too, and kind of spark curiosity.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else you guys wanted to say before we sign off?
Just
No.
I hope everyone who reads this book love it as much as we do and has as much fun in the reading as we did in the making of it.
Absolutely. And like with any graphic novel where you're dealing with a team of people who put like literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of work into making this the epic saga that it is, I am waiting with bated breath until it can get in the hands of little kids out there. So yeah.
Awesome. I want to do one quick call out to our amazing colorist, Whitney Kogar, our amazing letterer, Jim Campbell, and our amazing designer, Bones Leopard. They did an incredible job. They couldn't be here with us today, but they are absolutely a huge part of our creative team, and you will see how incredible their work is when you get the finished book in your hands, which everyone should do, coming out October 19th. Again, please visit our virtual booth so that you guys can see previews. Go to the Grab a Galley room. There is going to be a Grab a Galley of Unfinished Quarter. If you get there first, you can get the whole thing and read it early. And to see even more interviews and get all sorts of fun freebies, bookmarks, wallpaper, all kinds of cool stuff from our booth, and see what other programming we have coming up. We have lots more Wonderbound programming this week. There's going to be lots of announcements, so stay tuned with us. And if nothing else, then go visit our website at readwonderbound.com, and we will continue to see you guys throughout the week and throughout the year. Thanks everybody so much for being here.